of the 171st session of the Queen's University of Belfast Literary and Scientific Society. So we are here tonight for a very special debate. I say ordinary meeting, it is in fact extraordinary, because this is the annual Godkin debate. This is the chance for our brightest and newest speakers to battle it out in a great debate to be crowned the Godkin winner. There will be prizes for both Best Individual Speaker and Best Team. But enough of that for the moment. Let's move on to admin, because we all love that. So, first thing I want to admin about is our new pronoun policy. Now, this is still in its early stages, but this is a measure to make sure that we avoid misgendering people and make sure that everyone feels welcome as part of this society. So, move this on the PowerPoint. Thank you for the here. On the PowerPoint, now say President Matthew Bradley, pronouns he, him. Pronouns will be presented on every single name slide on PowerPoint, just to be more inclusive to every member of the community. So, move on. There we go. There it is again. So more announcements include the Christmas dinner. Thank you, Christmas. I actually forgot to do this earlier in the week, but Matthew Bryson, I've got a present for you. Here's your present. Can you open the envelope, show everyone what's inside, and then read it out in your best voice? So that's your Christmas present for the year.
Okay. There is £24.
Yeah.
And Merry Christmas from the Litterific.
There we go. Bespoke Christmas cards. If you want one, tough. I just made the one.
Do you want me to read inside as well?
Yeah, like stand up as well. It's a very personal message. I hope everyone's hearts and minds are warmed by this.
Okay. It starts romantically off. Oi you, yes you. Are you busy on the evening of Tuesday the 10th of December? What's that? You're not? Well, listen up, buckaroo. I've got some news I think you're going to really like. The Litterific Christmas dinner takes place on Tuesday the 10th of December in Kitch, a lovely restaurant between the Moody House Cinema and the Tesco Express on Dublin Road. It's sure to be a wonderful evening, so make sure you get signed up. But Matthew Bryson, how do I get signed up? I hear you weep. You must fill out the sign-up form that's linked on the event page. You can also access this from the form via the URL shown on the PowerPoint. Wow! This form must be filled out by 12 noon next Thursday. So there's not much time, so make sure you get that done as soon as possible. The Christmas dinner costs £24. You must have it paid by the end of next week's debate. I'll be taking payments at the end of tonight, so make sure you stick around to get money in. P.S. Bryson, I've put my payment in a little bag, bottom of the envelope. Love you, bye. Love you too.
There we go. That's our little heartwarming Christmas message. So yes, as Bryson said, the Christmas dinner, which is now frozen, the snow is all frozen in place. Christmas dinner will take place 10th of December. Get signed up. It's a great event. If you don't get signed up, you are officially sad. So, it's time to move on. I don't believe we've got any more announcements for this week, unless we do. Going once, going twice. No announcements! Excellent. So that means we get to move on with the evening and indeed our lives. So the reading of the minutes of our 9th ordinary meeting, this House supports national security over individual liberty of Miss Chloe Ferguson. Reading the minutes tonight to you via her mouth from that laptop screen. Please welcome Miss Chloe Ferguson.
For those of you who were here slightly early, you'll have seen that I had a bit of a mental breakdown before this because my Microsoft Word just crashed. So shout out to Matthew Sullivan, HLM, thanks, just giving you your title, for fixing everything, making sure we have minutes this week. Okay, so on Thursday the 14th of November, 57 members of the Literary and Scientific Society at Queen's University Belfast came together in the Senate room to debate the motion, "This House supports national security over individual liberty." The evening began with announcements by President Matthew Bradley, which were gleefully interrupted by Conor McCardle, who looked like he was a child owning up to his dad after saying a naughty word at the dinner table. Conor referenced his distasteful language choices over the previous weeks, and that due to the fine system, it had accumulated to the albeit extravagant and unjust punishment that Conor now owed the President a nice street and a tricks. To the room's disappointment, Conor explained they were using all their nice streets in Armagh for smuggling things, so for the sake of not having to run another event officer election, we're not going to dig into that. Conor wanted to bring this to a fair climax, so what was a suitable alternative? As it was common knowledge the Prez is a fan of memes, hence he was presented with a little bit of bubbly, I cannot do that, I'm so sorry. Which while Bradley accepted this, he still had the grumpy exterior of a disgruntled grandfather, as Matthew was hoping to use this as a deafening blackmail for the remainder of Connor's life.
No, but still will.
And what can only be used to describe to extract some unspeakable favours. After this, the House began its evening discussions with a dose of private members' business from Tom McGuinness, who brought up the recurring and highly topical discussion of the revamp of Nightmare Sonic, describing him as the previous incarceration of everyone's favourite speedy blue boy, who looked like he was going to sneak into your room at night and steal your skin, flaying your flesh with your bones and devouring it. That's right, and bringing all of that mental images back into your head. So enjoy. Tom asked the House whether they believed the countless hours of the animators' work to redo the animation was going to be worth it. Mark Gilmore, Gamer Boy and the embodiment of festive cheer, jumped to defence, exclaiming hats off to Paramount Pictures. They listened to the people, and that should be applauded. And that is exactly what Mark tried to begin. However, in a moment more awkward when Mark had to remind everyone about the Nazis, his attempt to start a clap tragically failed. I'm sorry, Dr. Cretton. The House then moved on to a point from Laura Curry, who raised to the House the importance of mental health and providing meals to the homeless. Ryan Bowie responded, worrying that it isn't something that is brought up often enough. I just mentioned you, Ryan. Hello. And to reiterate, Ryan Bowie responded, agreeing that this isn't something that is brought up enough, homelessness, and that the attitudes of the public and politicians need to change so we can work together to solve the problem and support our fellow humankind. Other pieces of private members' business were given from Conor McArdle. President's questions were then taken, beginning with Jasmine Stoltzfeld, who corrected me last week, so I'm so sorry, continuing the trend and actually asking Matthew questions about the functioning of the society, and no surprise for everyone involved. Asking how we choose the motions on the term card for next semester, so in case some of you weren't here, I'm just going to explain briefly. There's going to be a spreadsheet that's going to go up in the next week or two, and so you pop all your ideas on there, and then in another few weeks' time we're going to have an internal meeting. So where we get together, we defend the motions you like, we cut it down, and then our internal convener, Mr. Russell Nairn, will essentially come up with a term card for the next semester. Okay, so Professor Storby also posed the President a question. If President Matthew could be any character from Harry Potter, who would it be? After some deliberation, the President answered Dobby the House Elf. Unlooking at him tonight, you know what? I get it. Mr. Conor McArdle then asked the President if he could go to any pub in Belfast, which one would it be? Bradley quickly and promptly replied Cuckoo, as it is full of video games and people cry there. So essentially, a place where Matthew could feel at home. Other President's questions were taken from Pierre Crozier, Matthew Sullivan, HLN. There was a vote of prior opinion on the motion. This House supports national security over individual liberty, with 10 votes for the proposition, 27 votes for the opposition, and 8 votes for the abstentions. Speaking first of the proposition, we had Innes Watson, who made clear that the proposition does not support dictatorship. However, national security is pertinent to tackling terrorism, and measures must be in place to minimise crime rates, which means sacrificing individual liberties to prevent further harm. The McSorley began the argument for the opposition by stating this debate was the tip of a massive iceberg of societal discussion. Beck argued that you should not let the fear of what might happen control an entire population, and that freedom itself entails risk. Privacy is a fundamental safeguard and a barrier from the state to control you. So I was thinking about this, and I was trying to come up with a literary alternative to really go with a metaphor. And what came to mind was Matthew snooping at all of your laptops. And you may think this wouldn't be too bad, but we all know the President is peak chaotic energy, and he would be sneaky about it. So he would leave little notes in your essay submissions because he would assume that you would read back on them, but let's be honest, none of us ever do. And so inevitably your tutor will be wondering why you're advertising break sausage rolls through every single one of your essays. Jean Perry spoke second to the proposition, pointing out that we must sacrifice some of our own liberty to ensure the collective safety of all of us. There are times we must compromise on our interests to ensure the needs of the many. Here, Cruzley spoke in the maiden speech up to the society that the idea of national intervention allows the government to take advantage of their citizens. The right to freedom of speech and family violence are built into the individual liberties of specific communities. Conor McArdle said it right this time, closed with the proposition stating that while it is cozy nice talk, we need to realise you need to give up some elements of your liberty for the greater good of your stations. Mr. McArdle argues that to prevent harm and ensure justice, this House should vote the proposition. Mr. Virginia Sweeney, in both her maiden speech in the Society and final speech for the debate, argued that the side of the opposition is not about curtailing the freedoms of everyone else to guarantee personal liberty. Questions were taken from Mr. Mark Grumler, Shane McGuinness, Matthew Bryson, James Orchin, Ben Cabin, and Matt Lee. The vote on speaker ability for the motion "This House supports national security over individual liberty" had 30 votes for the proposition, 5 votes for the opposition, and 5 votes for the abstentions, making the proposition won. May I take the minutes as read?
Aye.
Thank you so much for those minutes and my new title of Sneaky Twat. So, without further ado, we move on to the agenda, because organisation is fun. We begin with some private members' business. This is your opportunity to bring up something topical in the news. So if you want to talk about something, put your hand up and we can start a discussion. Mr. Sullivan was first, but he was very enthusiastic to go ahead.
So, following on from the election debate that happened the other day, is anyone else just like not even remotely surprised at the fact that the Conservatives blatantly lied in such an obvious and like unsneaky way?
Mr. Jack Patton's hand was up there, so...
Not only am I not surprised, I have to tip my, as much as I despise it, I have to tip my head to ever thought of the strategy, because it is brilliant narcissism. It is an exceptional fact that they meant to get caught. The entire point of this was not to deceive people during the debate, all of that was useful for them. The simple fact is they wanted as many Tory talking heads on the news to repeat the phrase Jeremy Corbyn's a liar, Jeremy Corbyn's a liar, Jeremy Corbyn's a liar over and over and over again, even though it's bollocks.
Oh, I'm afraid that's a fine, Mr. Patton.
You will get your welcome for it.
I know.
Historically never been fined for that word, and I've used it about 100 times.
Oh, then we won't find them then. I think everyone knows my view on swearing at the moment if you've talked to me in the pub, so the imposition of fines is purely procedural. Are there any other thoughts on that? Yes, Ashley Kane.
I just wondered if I could get a brief context of this, because I didn't watch it.
Do you want to recap the rage in the cage?
So during the election debate, the Conservatives had a Twitter account called Fact Check UK, claiming to be an independent fact-checking service, which was of course a blatant and obvious lie, as they have admitted, because it was being run by the Conservative Party and consisted entirely of going, Jeremy Corbyn's a liar, Boris won by the way.
But that's not explicitly true that it claimed to be an independent fact-checking service. It claimed to be a fact-checking service on behalf of CCHQ, which stands for Conservative Campaign Headquarters. So, and the Twitter handle stayed at the Conservatives, and if you even bothered to click on it, you could tell it was by the Conservatives because its website was conservatives.com. And I'd say that Labour actually have one that claims to be one on behalf of Labour, another fact-checking service under a different name that is also the same. So I think it's bad politics on behalf of both parties, but it's not just a problem on behalf of the Conservative Party.
Here, here. Your hands are up now. The spice has begun.
I would like to ask to the House, like, how can a fact-checking be conservative or progressive when it's just fact-checking? It's just facts. The facts are facts. Are objective. Aren't they?
Russell looks very happy, so I'm also, because you look so happy, I'm going to ask you to state your name for the minutes in the happiest way you can.
My name is Russell Nairn for the minutes, and I am sad. To in any way suggest that, like, oh, this was really obviously a conservative fact-checking service when from an initial outset, which is what Twitter as a format relies upon just seeing it, is weaselry to the highest degree, going, oh no, it wasn't that dishonest actually, because if you search under this rock over here, you can find out that it wasn't. That is absolute, and I get to say the word, bollocks.
Well, hey, you state your name for minutes, please. I'm going to do this for everyone, just to be really annoying.
Keir Crozier. I think it's good to scale this into some context. The Twitter account in question, CCHQ, as Matthew already says, has 77,000 followers. 7.5 million people watched the debate. In other words, less than 1% of the people watching would have seen this Twitter account. Furthermore, 130,000 people are Conservative Party members. We may reasonably assume that the vast majority, if not all of the people who followed this account, were already dyed the old Tories who were going to go Conservative anyway.
Any other thoughts? Yes, can you say it for the minutes, please?
My name is Jake Kieran and I am a Met boy at this moment in time.
Oh.
So there's a case to be made that yes, they only have 70,000 followers on that. However, that's ignoring the influence of retweets and just things appearing in people's feeds. And when you're just scrolling through, you can often miss the more specific tag, which reveals it is indeed a Conservative page. Was this malicious? I'm not sure I buy the theories that this was directly intended to be caught. What I think is probably likely is that it was intended to be facetious and probably wasn't adequately thought through.
There we go. Are there any other thoughts on this? I reckon this is quite a big issue. We'll go back to Russell and we may draw a line under it.
The weasel pops up from his mulberry bush and says, but I only lied to 70,000 people. That's okay. No, it's nonsensical. I don't care that it only affected a small percentage of the demographic watching it. I think any party, anyone who behaves in this kind of behaviour should be called out and lambasted for it, because it is not how you engage in healthy civil discourse. It's absolute bollocks.
We're going to have to start finding that word, because otherwise it's just going to be it's just going to become a noise by the end of the year.
It was on Star Trek. It can't be a swear.
You heard it here, folks. If it's on Star Trek, it can't be a swear. Are there any other thoughts on this issue? Wow, no. So does anyone have any other issues they want to bring up? Matt Lee.
Do you think that Prince Andrew should be prosecuted for the rumoured allegations of him engaging with Jeffrey Epstein on his little island? You obviously know the context behind that. Do you think he should be brought to question? He said that he stepped down from his royal role, so do you think he should be brought before the court?
It was addressed to me before the room. So, Jack Patton, we've said to you before, say some things.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, can you say your influence?
Yes, yes, absolutely. There is a constitutional principle in this country called the rule of law, and it essentially means no one is above the law. Absolutely no one. And that applies to a prince as much as it does to a certain former prime minister that I shan't mention.
Wow. We definitely hear some things here from that record. Yes, something on the table. You say your influence.
I think it's quite interesting that the Americans at the moment and the FBI are like, you should come to America and be questioned and maybe prosecuted, but we will question you. And at the same time are refusing to allow the British authorities to question the woman who hit, was it Harry Dunn? In just recently, she fled back to the States, so it's a bit quid pro quo. They can't say, let us question him, but you can't question our people.
Ooh, are there any thoughts on that issue? Noting the safety hands, so if you do have an opinion, don't be very set. I'll go to Russell then first, and then Matt Lee.
To begin with, I fully agree with any possible prosecution of Prince Andrew that could occur. I additionally would like to share this funny quip with you all. What do you get when you cross Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton? You get murdered in a jail cell.
Respond to that, apart from to just look at how disgusted the Queen looks by all of this. So no, I'm not having this.
Would this result in the fact that a prosecution of Prince Andrew by his mother, technically through the crown? So his mum would be taking him to court, sending him down.
Oh, that's so embarrassing. You're going to jail, son. Oh. Yes, we sing it first.
I kind of. Speaking of the Queen, is it not a bit questionable that she has 100% clearly stood up for her son with no investigation? She, as the person who is supposed to be the head of, the Crown Prosecution Service, should she have
mentioned anything in terms of this? Should she have come out against him?
You could feel the atmosphere in the room. Oh, Umar, do you have thoughts?
Yes, I think the Queen has kept a policy, a very, very strict policy of being neutral on controversial things, and she cannot, even though she is the de facto, well, not the de facto, but the official head of the Crown Prosecution Service, she can't just set aside the presumption of innocence and the due process of law and bring a case against her on her own.
Any other thoughts on this? Rather big issue. Matthew Sullivan.
Yeah, no, if Prince Andrew actually gets prosecuted for this, which he won't, by the way, I will eat, not my hat, because I don't own any hats, but I will eat someone's hat.
You will eat. I've seen him eat. If someone will
Then yeah, if he gets prosecuted, I'll eat your hat.
Maybe wash it.
Well, heard it here, folks. Matthew Sullivan's going to eat a hat. So, any other separate bits of private members' business? Wow, that was quick, Russell, man.
So, continuing my long-standing saga of library-related items, I'm wondering what everyone thinks about the gracious, joyous return of 24-hour library service within Clay. Because I've been finding that going to the library when would be healthy for my body just wasn't really, my style. And as a result, I've decided that at around 3 a.m. occasionally, most nights, I get this strange calling as though I'm some sort of ancient vampire creature to make my way to the Clay, sit in a very secluded corner and just sort of look at books for a long time, and this brings me joy. So I'm wondering if anyone else is brought joy by such things, and if anyone else will agree to stay out of the C.S. Lewis room because it's mine.
Are you sure you're not an ancient vampiric creature? Because to me this sounds like a thirst for blood. Are we going to see piles of corpses piling up in the bathrooms?
Or in the CS newsroom?
Yeah, in the CS. Yeah. It's nice and round, you could put them in a nice circle. Any thoughts on that? Any thoughts on the library of 24 hours? Wow. So let's move on. The library's now 24 hours, those who didn't know. It'll stop being 24 hours and then it is again, I guess. So I think we can draw private members' business to a close there. Tick. Are there any President's questions for the evening? You hand it up and then down again. Oh, Kirkroser.
Given that you have expressed your commitment to the outlawing of the term bollocks, may I suggest that perhaps we seek to bring back the term poppycock, a term which has sadly fallen out of use all too much in our wonderful English language, and I think Litterific could perhaps be trailblazers and bring it back into common parlance.
I mean, I can't actually legislate for its use, but I could certainly write it on some training documents. I can certainly say to Alfred, can you add the word poppycock in here? And he will go yes. So I'll see what I can do. Are there any more questions? Russell Mann.
If given a choice, a wealthy family member has just, your rich grand uncle Maurice has just unfortunately passed away, and in the process, well, yeah, he wasn't that very nice, but in the process, he has left to you as the sole benefactor of his estate £15 billion. But there is a caveat to this inheritance. In order to achieve this inheritance, you must spend 10 years in either of the English towns of Scunthorpe or Peniston. Which do you choose and why?
It has to be either, it can't be both.
You can transfer between, I suppose, but...
Yeah, I'd transfer between them and go to Cockermouth as well, just to add to it. I family that lives in Scunthorpe, so go there. That's a nice one. It's a very easy way to get the money. It's not, have they been carpet bombed or something? What's the deal with them?
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. Rich family member, supposedly dead, sends me to town, bombs town. Genius. Are there any other questions? J-Rag.
I'd like to ask the President to recount his experience in honour of the Godkin debate, of his Godkin debate.
Oh, it's humble brag time, lads. So, about 4 years ago now, I was a little confused fresher boy walking the streets of Queens. And I'd heard about this thing called the Litterific, and I'd seen it at the Freshers' Fair stall. But I didn't actually know it was the debating society, so I didn't go. And then in early December, a friend from school, who I've now known for over 10 years now, kind of clip-clopped up to me in the street and said, "Do you want to go to the Litterific?" And I'm like, "What's that?" And then he explained, and then he said that there was a debate on that he'd like me to speak at. And the motion was, this House believes 2016 is the best time to be alive. I went to that debate. It was the first time I'd been to the Society. I did an impression of Severus Snape. I mentioned the Bake Off. In fact, I think most of my speech about why 2016 is the best time to be alive for the opposition was in 2015, Bake Off was on the BBC. And it wasn't a very good speech. I still won it. Which was purely an accident, and I'm just going to clarify that there was a lot of doping in those days, and you couldn't trust the outcome of the debate. But yeah, that was my experience with the Godkin, and then because I was somehow more introverted than I am now, I thought you always needed ID to get into a pub, so I just went home. I didn't speak to anyone. So they just saw this guy turn up, act like not going to mince my words here, a bit of a dick at the front, and then leave. So I bet I was absolutely hated. So that's my story of the Godkin from 4 years ago. Winners since, the year after that, it was Morgan Hitman, and the year after that, it was Keenan McNally. Who's next? We'll find out soon. Russell Mayer for one final one before we discuss what's about to happen.
So, the motion we must debate before ourselves tonight is this House regrets the Arab Spring. And in keeping with that theme, I could ask you a question on one of two issues, because there are three words, and asking you a question about the third doesn't seem particularly interesting. And I will sway away from the second word and instead focus upon the third word by asking you if you could jump onto any particular object, which would it be and why?
Massive trampoline. Easy. I don't know why. That's not particularly funny. I just like the idea of jumping onto a massive trampoline. Boring answer, I'm sorry. We'll go for one more President's question because John McDonald looked really sad. John McDonald.
John McDonald, Shadow Chancellor. I hope to not be Chancellor. But on the topic, if you were given a magic money tree, where would you plant it?
I would plant it in my garden, which is near my house. Well, it's not actually near my house, it is adjacent to my house, because that's how gardens work. Are you going to give me a magic money tree?
Yeah.
Yes. And on that note, on the note of me getting lots of money and buying a lot of sausage rolls, we will move on to talking about tonight's debate. Tick. So, you'll see it's a bit different this evening. We've got the vote of prior opinion for what you all think now, the debate, and then, oh, what's this? The judges decide. What? What is this? I'll tell you. So, as I've said, Godkin debate, there is a winner and a team winner. This will be decided not by you, the people. I'm sorry, you're great, but we've got judges, and we've decided by a panel of judges. Those judges are Becca McMinn, our external convener for this year, Russell Nairn, our internal convener for this year, and Chloe Ferguson, who is our secretary for this year, and we'll be joining them at the table just before the debate begins to judge those people, leaving me just sitting at the front alone. So, the motion for tonight is this House regrets the Arab Spring. It will go very much like, that's not working. Yes, here we go. So that will, it'll go very much like any other debate. We'll have both prior opinion, the speakers will come up, they will give their 7-minute speeches, but when it's time for questions, the judges will leave the room. Hopefully not for too long, although take as much time as you actually need.
No, it'll take 15 minutes.
Good. I said take as much time as you need as a courtesy. If you did take like upwards of that, we would be sending in the snipers. So They'll be sent out, and then after that, after decided, they will come back in and they will declare the winner. But what does the winner win? I hear you cry loudly. So the winning team will each win a bar of Galaxy chocolate. There it is. And the winner, the proper winner, the individual winner will win what is in that bag, which is a cool Queen's thing. So, on that note, we're going to have a vote for prior opinion. We're not going to vote on speakability, because that's for the judges to decide. So, the vote on prior opinion on the motion. This House regrets the Arab Spring. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your hands and say aye.
Aye.
And could all those against the motion raise your hands and say nay? Nay. Like a horse. And those who wish to abstain on the motion, who don't believe in either side particularly, please raise your hands and say meh.
Nay.
Wow. So, what is that vote?
On the motion, this House regrets the Arab Spring, and Proposition have 13 votes, Opposition have 5 votes, and there are 17 abstentions, so abstentions have it.
The abstentions have it. Let's round of applause for that. So, who's going to win the Godkin debate? Who will be victorious? Who will be also really good, but they didn't win, but they were also really good? So, please welcome to propose the motion, Mr. Jonathan Horner.
Got to make sure I'm well organised. Respected colleagues, distinguished judges, as you're all very well aware, the task for the proposition in tonight's debate is to try to convince you that we should look back on the events of the Arab Spring with regret. Now, before I get into detail about how our argument will be set out, I feel it necessary not only to shed light on the events which have come to be known as the Arab Spring, but also the context in which these events took place. As a starting point, it's important to note that after the 9/11 attacks, the world focused its gaze on the Middle East as a region, only to recognise one key fact. The region was almost unique in the world in making no strides in political, economic or social progression in decades. With authoritarianism still rampant and extremism and terrorism growing and flourishing, the UN essentially laid bare these concerns in its report on Arab development in 2002. Given these concerns, it's no surprise the foundations for pro-democracy protests and uprisings had been laid. People were definitely justified in demanding change. Fast forward to 2011, when anti-government protests in Tunisia rocked the country to its core and set the stage for further protests, unrest and uprisings in Arabic-speaking countries in North Africa and the Middle East, where governments in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya and Yemen were toppled. I'll admit this sounds fantastic at first glance, especially when you take into consideration, or as an example, Libya, which had been governed for over 40 years by Colonel Gaddafi, a man so infamous as an authoritarian that he almost needs no introduction. Suffice to say, he isn't the type of fellow you would give your finest bottle of bubbly to. Folks, it's vital that our argument is clearly understood at the outset of tonight's debate. We are not trying to argue that democracy isn't worth fighting for, or that protests and uprisings were regrettable in themselves for wanting to remove authoritarian governments. Our approach is instead to look at everything that happened as a result of what occurred in 2011 and assess whether those countries who were most affected by it end up in a better position today than what they were in before the protests began. We can't stand here and say the aim of the protesters and uprisers was wrong or unconscionable, but intentions and aspirations aren't the only thing we should be considering here. If anything, the consequences of these events are even more informative. This is why the proposition are arguing that the events of the Arab Spring are regrettable, because the aspirations of positive change and progress have gone unrealised in the long run. In truth, the lasting legacy of the Arab Spring will be the effect it has had in further destabilisation of the Arab world. To give a few short examples, in Libya, let's take it, after Colonel Gaddafi's death, rebel militias had soon started turning on each other, with a full-scale civil war breaking out in 2014, which the country is yet to recover from. And the only victor from which could be said to be ISIS, given their massive expansion in the area. As a local student summed it up while speaking to a Guardian reporter, as he argued, life under Gaddafi was awful, but life under Gaddafi was better than what is happening now, because at least under Gaddafi they had some sort of security rather than chaos.
On that point,
yes.
Surely the Arab Spring, which describes the protesters and and as you said, the aspirations of the protesters, and indeed the demonstrations themselves, is not responsible, should not be held responsible. In fact, what the people who should be held responsible are the terrorist groups and indeed the military who are trying to impose dictatorship.
Well, if you take a simplistic view of events and cause and effect, yes, but the Arab Spring protests and uprisings, specifically in Libya, which was a very bloody uprising, set into motion a chain of events which led to the country being divided up and for there being a lack of governance. Also in Egypt, where there had been an attempt to institute a government with a focus on civil liberty protection, that government was soon quashed by a military coup. As of 2018, 75 people have been sentenced to death because they opposed the military coup in 2013. And we as the proposition are also open to perhaps the suggestion that Tunisia, out of all the countries who were affected by the Arab Spring, is a success story. But I find that a quote from Tunisian commentator Haitham Meki is very, very helpful here in setting out our general line of argument as the proposition. And I quote, "We are always comparing ourselves to the worst case scenarios, but when you want to succeed, you don't look to the last student in the classroom, you look to the first." And that is our argument. Clearly, Tunisia can be described as an exception that proves the rule with regards to the Arab Spring. The only reason we view Tunisia as a success story from the Arab Spring is because the bar for success is basically at the floor. It basically is at the floor. The truth, my friends, is harsh, but it must be faced. The protests, uprisings and unrest which constitute the Arab Spring pushed forward in the majority of cases without any real vision of what the long term would bring, leading to inner conflict and strife, a return to mass oppression and mass migration unheard of in modern history, resulting from this instability, which in turn led to even greater suffering. And that is why I implore you to vote with the proposition tonight in saying that the Arab Spring was a regrettable event or series of events. Thank you very much.
Can we have another round of applause for what was Jonathan Hall's main speech? get through tonight, so please welcome the First Leader of the Opposition, Bevan Tynkert.
Members of the House, honoured guests, we live in an age where our voices are often ignored, where protest goes ignored, where our demands for change go ignored in both democratic and non-democratic countries, where millions of people can protest the Iraq war, for example, and 1 million in our own country for that war to happen anyway, where police can brutally clamp down on protesters in Hong Kong, slowly advancing on a group of students in a burning university building, and nobody will do anything to stop it. And this is in free countries. This sounds bleak, disastrous even, but does that mean that we should just roll over and take injustice? The proposition is correct in saying that protests are important for important reasons. Should we stop fighting and stop protesting and stop voting and demanding over all channels to be seen and heard? Would you roll over and accept human rights abuses being committed in this country? Well, you're all opinionated and educated people, so I assume that you wouldn't. Why then would we agree with the view that the Arab Spring is regrettable when it's defending these very ideals of free speech and the right to protest that the proposition basically don't think that are important? In an atmosphere like this, a protest for change is always something that's commendable. The opposition will say that the positive aspects that have come from this protest and form part of these protests are more important than anything else. And we'll also be looking at the role of social media, how it formed and shaped the Arab Spring, and the good worldwide implications of this. The opposition doesn't deny that the Arab Spring led to some profoundly negative consequences. We don't discount the sacrifices of many lives that have come about in part due to this. It's not negligible, it shouldn't be treated as such, but many gave their lives for a cause. It's possibly more disrespectful to say that this cause was entirely regrettable. Furthermore, we can see that the Arab Spring was more successful in some countries than others, but the successes and the role that they did have in motivating change just can't be ignored. If you regret the Arab Spring, you're saying that you regret a shift towards democracy on a massive scale in a region where we in the West never thought this would happen. No, thank you. I believe that democracy is a good thing. You know my view that neither in a democracy or an autocracy, they don't care about you, but at least in a democracy, people can be held somewhat accountable, and you've said, yes, democracy has value. To be able to stand up for yourself in the face of high unemployment, rising food prices and corruption is so important. If you regret the Arab Spring because of the negative consequences it had, people, you need to look closer to home. The Civil Rights March in Derry in 1968 is now widely regarded as the start of the Troubles, decades of violence. But it's about defending the basic freedoms of all citizens, no matter their background, and highlighting significant abuses of power. These goals were eventually achieved, reforms were eventually made, although things aren't perfect. We're only 9 years from the start of the Arab Spring, and we've already seen Tunisia's system transform into a country with free and democratic elections after just 28 days of civil protest. Perfect change isn't going to happen overnight, it takes time. Just this year, we've seen multiple uprisings and protest movements in Algeria, Sudan, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, elsewhere. A possible continuation of the Arab Spring? In Morocco, the Arab Spring helped bring about some constitutional reforms, and protests still occur there now that the people have the confidence to protest and the confidence to speak freely. We could still be talking about a movement that's ongoing, it's long-term, it's not consigned to be this failure of the past. It still has a long way to go, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned that it's 9 years since the start of the Arab Spring. 9 years, and yet we still only have one democratic country in the Arab world. How can you measure that as a success?
What I'm saying is it's not completely a failure, and that success is really important and shouldn't be denied. And again, it took 30 years here, one could say. The Arab Spring is also one of the first widespread political movements to use social media to its fullest extent. And with the exception of Libya, use of social media platforms more than doubled in Arab countries during the protests, suggesting that they had an important part to play in organising and creating change in what was for the most part a very organic movement. There are things that the rest of the world can learn from this. Social media isn't just for memes or sharing selfies with a million different filters on. It can be used to give a voice to the voiceless, a way to critique authoritarian regimes, a way to give some power back to the individual, and make a movement international by raising global awareness. Now seen as one of the major causes of the Arab Spring, social media have the power to humanise political oppression and to spread ideas in the simplest way possible. The general starting point for the protest is debatable, but it's usually seen as Mohammed I can't say his name properly, Bouazizi's self-immolation in front of a government building. He was a Tunisian street vendor, protesting police brutality and corruption. And this is one of the several stories told and retold on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, in ways that inspired dissidents to organise protests, criticise their governments, and spread ideas about democracy. The Tunisian government desperately tried to ban these sites and failed. Outside influences were able to help with the dissemination of information. Networks formed online were crucial in organising activists. This was a movement from the ground up of ordinary people, helped by ordinary people. It didn't come from the extremist groups who later co-opted some aspects of the revolution for their own ends in some countries. Since 2011, the Middle East has experienced an explosion of political activity. Hundreds of political parties, civil society groups, newspapers, TV stations, online media have launched, even in Libya, where political parties were banned for decades under Gaddafi. 374 parties contested the 2012 parliamentary elections. There's a rallying cry from many of the protesters. The people want to bring down the regime. This was a change that was necessary. These nations had to make it for themselves. Social media worked most effectively in Tunisia and Egypt. Facebook, Twitter, and other social media played a key role in the movement of activists in these areas. 90% of Egyptians and Tunisians responding to a poll that they used Facebook to organise protests and spread awareness. I had a basis in years of activism and revolutionary work in these countries, so I'm not saying it's the only tool that's needed to protest. The Arab Spring revealed that it's useful on an unprecedented scale. Non-traditional social media activism is only growing and growing, and could prove even more important in promoting and preserving the ideals of freedom we want to see in the world, not just in these states. The Arab Spring has shown us all how to turn the tide. The Arab Spring was and is a revolution that's not born of the West, but rather, as its name suggests, it sprang from the ground up. It proved something on a social level and on an international one. It proved that in spite of everything, people in authoritarian regimes do have the power to create change. It proved that social media can successfully be used as an organisational tool for campaigns in the future. The Arab Spring is civil disobedience for the 21st century, and people will be harmed in creating necessary change. It's no small loss, but it's a price the opposition are willing to pay to protect the ideals of revolution, democracy, freedom, civil rights. I asked the proposition, how dare they reject that? How dare they tell Tunisians who've had a successful transition to democracy that these hard-won freedoms are all regrettable? To protest, even when there seems like no hope of success, is better than to do nothing. So I implore you tonight to side with the opposition. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, and especially ladies and gentlemen of the judges, earlier this month, the world celebrated the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. What followed there was a swift domino effect as the Soviet Empire collapsed across Eastern Europe, and her people emerged from the darkness of 50 years of oppression and walked into the light of a brave new age of freedom and democracy. 22 years later, in 2011, there was an optimism that the events which followed the self-immolation in Tunisia of the 26-year-old street vendor Mohammed Bouazizi would lead to a similar effect in North Africa and the Middle East. This optimism was woefully ill-founded. More than 8 years after the Arab Spring, we are now living in the Arab winter. We have not seen a region of flourishing democracies emerge. Quite the opposite. In place of secular regimes, we have seen a succession of Islamic extremist theocracies and failed states. One example is Libya. Before the Arab Spring, Libya was a socially progressive country with free healthcare, free education.
My point. Would you not agree that free healthcare and freedom of expression is kind of limited by the fact that their dictator used to every night wave his finger at the Libyan people and threaten them with death? Hence his son had his own fingers cut off as a result.
Well, I would refer you there to Isaiah Berlin's famous essay on the two concepts of liberty, and he absolutely acknowledged that individual liberty could exist in the context of benevolent despotism. And there I would argue that what was existing in Libya then was much closer to benevolence than what is there now, which I will explain. Libya preceded our own United Kingdom by 2 years in introducing equal pay for equal work between men and women in 1970. And it was prosperous. It had the highest GDP per capita in the continent. It also had the highest life expectancy in the continent. It'll fear people in poverty in the Netherlands. Nowadays, it's a failed state. It has no effective government. This Spartan militias fight for control, with the internationally recognised Tobruk government vying for power with the extremist National Salvation government, who still hold the capital Tripoli, along with various ISIS-affiliated groups. We can also look to Egypt, the historic homeland, pyramids of Antony and Cleopatra, package holidays. Under Hosni Sheikh Mubarak, it was a bastion of religious toleration. Now Coptic Christians live in fear of their lives. They're attacked, their churches are burnt, people are killed in car bombings, suicide bombings, shootings, beheadings. All as a result of their religious beliefs. In its first election after the revolution, Egypt elected Mohammed Morsi, leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, a formerly banned organisation. A year later, the Egyptian military ousted him in a coup. He was tried a year and he died on trial. Worst, and consequently best known, is of course Syria, a country torn by civil war for 8 years. We've seen chemical weapons used, the most horrific suffering, and the emergence of Islamic State on both sides of the Iraqi-Syrian border. Over 500,000 people have been killed. That's more than 10 times as many people as were killed in the entire Blitz in Great Britain during World War II. More than 5 million people have been forced to flee Syria, equivalent to the entire population of Scotland. This has not been easy for anyone. Unsurprisingly, given this hardship... Yes?
Now, you've listed several countries that have fallen to ruin. However, just to establish, do you actually blame the demonstrators of the Arab Spring who wanted, after years and years of dictatorship, to establish a democracy? Do you blame these people for what has happened?
I think, with all due respect, you're guilty here of trying to reframe the debate. This isn't a debate as to who was right and who was... It's not about assigning blame. It's about, has the world, and the Arab world in particular, become a better place since the Arab Spring? This House regrets the Arab Spring. It's not about apportioning blame and being some sort of judge on this matter. And definitely, we can say unequivocally, the world has gotten worse as a result of what happened. In the wake of the Arab Spring, an entire industry of people smugglers has emerged. Deeply unscrupulous men who take considerable sums of money, often around €1,000 from per individual's family, put them under rickety boats with no care as to whether they live or die, and send them towards Europe. In 2015, when the humanitarian crisis was at its peak, over 1 million refugees from Europe arrived in that year alone. Tens of thousands of people have drowned in the Mediterranean. In Douglas Murray's excellent book, The Strange Death of Europe, he recounts the story of meeting one man who had arrived from the Italian island of Lampedusa. And the man was in tears because his boat had sank and he managed to save one of his children, but he watched his wife and his other child drown in front of him. And these stories are not unusual. As I say, thousands of people are just like this per individual. Ladies and gentlemen, no doubt many of you are familiar with J.R.R. Tolkien's epic The Lord of the Rings. Watching Bevan so eloquently make her case for the opposition, and I'm very confident this will be the same for Umar and Matthew as well, I was reminded of Saruman, evil wizard, or more specifically, the voice of Saruman. For those who are unfamiliar, Saruman had such a lovely way of speaking that he could trick people into believing that clear untruths were in fact great words of wisdom. But a falsehood, however nicely told, does not become the truth. Social media, as Bevan pointed out, was hugely used by the protesters of the Arab Spring. But the main beneficiaries of this new way of campaigning have been ISIS, who shared on YouTube videos of beheadings and people being burned alive and men parading their Kalashnikovs and their suicide bats. They've been the real winners of this, not us, and certainly not the people of the Middle East. The truth tonight, ladies and gentlemen, comes from myself and my fellow members of the proposition. A fact which I have every confidence that the most discerning men and women of the House tonight will have no trouble telling. The Arab Spring was, and has continued to be, a disaster for women, for gay people, for Christians, for Jews, or just for those people who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their lives have not changed for the better. It has not delivered democracy. It has not delivered security. It certainly hasn't delivered freedom for the individual. What it has brought is death, destruction, and displacement. The Arab world, and by that extension the whole world, would be a better place if it had never happened.
President, distinguished judges, ladies and gentlemen, let me first remind the House, if any of you are getting less excited, about the momentous series of events that we are discussing today. The Arab Spring describes a period between December 2010 and late 2012 in which 20 million people across the Middle East and North Africa, in mostly dictatorships, which have mostly seen decades upon decades of corrupt, despicable, and frankly, scumbag dictators. They took to the streets in the name of human rights. Let's have no mistake about that. They took to the streets in the name of human rights. They took to the streets in the name of democracy. They took to the streets in the name of free speech, which allows us to speak on here today. Not just yet. They took to the streets in the name of everything that every single person in this room takes for granted. Our main point this evening is, in fact, that of democracy. As Boris Johnson once very famously told Jeremy Corbyn in Parliament, we are the side of the many, and you are the side of the few. Now, ladies and gentlemen, nowhere is that truer than in this debate. We, on the opposition, are here to side with those protesters. Because we can only imagine how they must have felt for decades upon decades, being tortured, being killed for speaking out, Yes, please.
You say you take the side of protesters. Do you take the side of the Muslim Brotherhood? Do you take the side of the Al-Nusra Front? Do you take the side of Al-Qaeda? Do you take the side of Islamic State?
No, because we do not believe that the protesters who are rallying for democracy can possibly, it does not make any sense that they would support such fascistic and theocratic and militant organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, we are also here to defend the right to protest. We believe that human rights are not just for rich, wealthy people in Western countries or even in developed first world countries. They are for every single soul on the face of this planet. And it is the right of every single soul on the face of this planet to demand self-determination, to demand their rights. Because we do not receive our rights gratefully from the government. They are ours, they are our birthright. And it is frankly disgraceful that this motion is being argued for.
On that point,
yes,
is it not the case that you are guilty here of sort of twisting the motion into what it is not? The motion in this case is not the House regrets democratic protest. Does this House regret the Arab Spring? And you are basically sorry.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was going to get to that right now. The proposition has made an excellent attempt at twisting and framing this debate as though we are discussing the consequences and unfortunate and tragic aftermath of the Arab Spring, the aftermath of the Arab Spring, mainly caused by actors who are acting, by people who are acting in contrary to the ideals which the protesters were marching in favor of. Ladies and gentlemen, the Arab Spring, as I said in the beginning of my speech, describes that period between 2010 and 2012, and it describes the movement of democracy. It describes the protesters. It describes the movement. That is the colloquial name given to the movement for democracy in the Middle East, started in 2011. Yes, please.
I think you're guilty of somewhat, you have looked through rose-tinted glasses of these protesters. An awful lot of these people did not want democracy. They opposed secular dictators because they were secular. They wanted Islamic theocracy, and in many cases they've got it.
Well, I think you've just attempted to make a sweeping generalization about these people. I'm afraid you have no evidence whatsoever to prove that, and the vast majority of those interviewed wanted, frankly, very clearly wanted human rights, wanted their human rights, wanted free, fair and fair elections. And I'm very grateful to the opposition for at least mentioning Tunisia. Ladies and gentlemen, the first leader of the independent Republic of Tunisia ruled from 1957 to 1987 for 30 years. But thank God he was replaced with a military coup by another dictator who ruled from 1987 until 2011, ladies and gentlemen. And yet, according to the proposition today, we are to regret the fact that that dictatorship came to an end because the citizens of that country rose up and said, no more.
On that point,
ladies and gentlemen, they would like to they would like to claim that the Arab Spring was an almost total disaster apart from Tunisia. But I'm afraid that is also false. Big protests, very large protests, also took place in Bahrain and Jordan. Both of those countries are very stable, and for the first time, both of those countries' monarchies have actually given power to an elected democratic legislature. They've actually allowed the legislature to act on the will of the people, and they've taken measures to actually combat corruption in their countries. Ladies and gentlemen, we have to be very clear about this. The unintended aftermath of we in the opposition are very clear about this, the unintended aftermath of the events that took place, yes, they are very, very tragic. As the refugee crisis, as mentioned by the proposition, the Syrian civil war, the Libyan civil war, these are very tragic protests. But I'm afraid, these are very tragic events, But I'm afraid to say that we regret the Arab Spring because of these events would be greatly, grossly unjust. Because they will, unlike contrary to what the opposition proposes, the proposition proposes, they will, in fact, be to blame the protesters and to blame those who marched for democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, it would be grossly ineffective if this House said that one of the very few movements, one of the first mass movement of people for democracy and human rights in the Middle East was regretted. The only thing that this House ought to regret is the scourge of terrorism and dictatorship that has ravaged the Middle East. I beg leave to oppose this motion.
Very briefly before we call the next speaker up, I would ask that if you feel the need to leave the room, you wait until a speech is finished to do so. Thank you. It's not fair when people are speaking through competition to leave the room or enter. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you very much, Russell, for that. Absolutely. Make sure you pay utmost attention to the speakers and give them the best opportunity to give their speech that they can. And can we have another round of applause for what was Umar's biggest speech? Welcome to conclude the proposition, Shane McGuinness.
Good people of the House, tonight you've heard many reasons why we should regret the Arab Spring. Yes, it was between 2010 and 2012, but its consequences will be long-lasting. Civil war, famine, terrorism, and refugee crisis. The list goes on and on and on. And so we as a proposition find it hard to understand how any reasonable person can look holistically at this chaotic mess and call it a success. As Jonathan and Keir have already stated, we are not a side of pro-authoritarianism or pro-dictatorship as the opposition would like to paint us. No, instead, we very much value democracy and human rights, and we do believe it is a force worth fighting for. But this debate is not a debate on democracy, on whether democracy is desirable or not. This debate demands that we ask ourselves to weigh up the outcomes of the Arab Spring and come to a conclusion as to whether we regret it or not. This side of the House overwhelmingly regrets the Arab Spring. Now a bit of rebuttal. In his earlier point of information, the second opposition speaker mentioned terrorists were to blame for the failure of the Arab Spring. But how did these terrorists come to the fore? It was a power vacuum caused by the events of the Arab uprisings that allowed these terrorists to take their place and wreak havoc. The opposition puts forth the point of Tunisia and how it can be seen as a success now as a democracy. Well, I guess it can be seen as a success if Tunisia is the only Arab state in existence. But then again, Tunisia, the success of Tunisia, as Jonathan pointed out earlier on, is minimal down here. With this year's election, only 40% of people turning up to the polling stations, down 20% in the previous election. With the leading party being the Ennahda party, links to the Muslim Brotherhood and other corruptions. This leads on to a point made by my fellow speakers. You see, these risings were not properly coordinated. Many of the protesters had different aims to one another. Some wanting a more secular society, some wanting a more democratic society, and some who wanted to keep the status quo. But there were also those who wanted to create their own Islamic state, and they were successful. As you know, the Arab Spring resulted in civil war across the region, with governments collapsing left, right and centre. With the rapid emergence of the ISIS caliphate, who were arguably more brutal and more inhumane than the Gaddafis of the past. You know, Colonel Gaddafi, he wouldn't dare broadcast on live TV. Yes.
You mentioned ISIS, but surely everyone has noted, every single political journalist worth their salt has noted that ISIS was a result of the United States and UK invasion of Iraq. That is where ISIS began. They would not even exist. They would not even exist if it but for the United States and the UK invading Iraq. How can you possibly?
So that was my point. So I said that the power vacuum left by the Arab Spring allowed ISIS to take their place and create their own brutal, inhumane Islamic state. And you know, Colonel Gaddafi, he wouldn't have dared broadcast on live TV people being burnt to death in cages, but ISIS, they were more brutal, they were more inhumane than what was there before. Our question to the House, our question to the opposition, was it really worth it? What has been achieved? Are the starving children of Yemen or the refugees from Syria in a better predicament now than they were almost a decade ago?
On that point,
Yes.
to blame all that on the Arab Spring seems very, very short-sighted when there's so many other factors that cause these things. And we mentioned the good things that did happen. So would you not acknowledge that international factors had more of an effect, like my colleague said?
You've mentioned a good thing, Tunisia, and I've mentioned its shortcomings. And I'm not suggesting that the Arab Spring is to blame for all of that, but you know, before the Arab Spring there was security with these authoritarian dictatorships. I'm not saying it was all well and dandy, but at least there was security. You know, we could go on and on and on with statistics that show why the current situation is as dire as it is. Because you know, the evidence is overwhelming. But we don't need to tell you that. The House can see the suffering and hardships of the Arab people on their streets, on their TVs, every day, every hour. And I'm saddened to say there is no foreseeable end. In conclusion, one flower does not make a spring. Tunisia's minimal success cannot overshadow the chaoticness that we see in North Africa and in the Middle East. The opposition talk about democracy, but the fact is this debate is not on democracy. This debate is on cause and consequence. It is evaluating the costs and benefits. Indeed, if the Arab Spring was a success, and if it did bring about democracy, we, the proposition, would be spurring on the House to vote for the other side. But it wasn't a success. It was a catastrophe. Therefore, tonight, we ask the House to use their reasoned judgment and answer the question. Looking at what has been achieved, taking into account all the suffering, was it really worth it? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your speech. So, let's welcome up to conclude for the opposition and indeed the debate, Matt Lee.
There's been an important exertion during this debate tonight, and that's the figure of 140,000 dead bodies. 140,000 mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, aunties, uncles, teachers, police officers, army officers, brave people that stood up for the rights for democracy. 20 million demonstrators stood within the streets of Arab capitals demanding that their vote be heard, that their dictators, that we've heard from the proposition tonight, applied security in slaughter. We heard from the third speaker, Shane, you spoke about the fact that Gaddafi would have never stood being broadcasted on Libyan national television, burning people in cages. Well, no, he wouldn't. Instead, he used mass armed forces to destroy villages and tribes that didn't support his campaign for a new Libya. Instead, his army officers broke into houses with families, separated them, took them into internment camps, no different from the gulags of Soviet Russia. But ladies and gentlemen, what is the point of this debate tonight? This debate tonight is how can we, as a House, express regret. A regret towards the vision, the bravery of those in Tunisia who demanded fair elections. Express regret at the courage of those that stood up against Gaddafi on the streets of Tripoli.
On that point?
Yes, I'll say that.
It's not so much, it's not at all we express regret with courage or bravery or standing up for freedom. We express regret with the outcome of what happened. In the same way one might express regret with, say, the charge of the Light Brigade. I would compare the two events.
You could express regret at the outcome of what happened, but the outcomes that you've spoken, the proposition have expressed tonight, are the outcomes of US imperialist foreign policy in certain areas of the Middle East. The rise of IS, we were speaking about, the speakers before on the opposition side were talking about the rise of IS and how that was a direct result of US and British involvement in Iraq. But if we defend the rights of those dictators, I'll take the point.
Did the Arab Spring not accelerate ISIS's rise to power in the Middle East?
I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that there has been an increase in Islamic extremism as a result of destabilisation of the Middle East. But I wouldn't express regret at the individuals. I wouldn't express regret at the action of campaigning, the action of storming the streets, demanding something better for your life. That was the Arab Spring. The Arab Winter is a result of the US, of Britain, of the European powers, leaving the Arab world behind, telling them, I won't tell that one, telling them to get on with it. Get on with it by yourselves. So people were justified in demanding change. People were justified in saying that they wanted something else. And people were justified in rejecting what the proposition has spoken about tonight, which is stability in the face of slaughter. That's what it is. If we speak with rose-tinted glasses, as the proposition has, of these dictators that provided rights for minorities, defended the rights for freedom of speech, defended the rights for a capitalist society. Gaddafi, was he actually that bad? Well, the Nazis were ahead of their days with animal rights. The Soviets were ahead of their days on abortion laws under Lenin. We can't look at small advances at the face of millions, of thousands, being oppressed and killed. I won't take that point. I won't take any more lectures from the proposition online. So murder, terror, threat, is that what we have to look at? Do we not accept, as the opposition has, that there are baby steps, that we have walked forward into a new light in the Middle East, that we can move on, we can urge individuals to build new societies, like in Tunisia, as was spoken about, that we can go into monarchies, like Bahrain, and say, well, actually, the people want different, and we can engage with the system. That was a part of the Arab Spring. Jordan, now constitutional monarchy as a result of it. That was a part of the Arab Spring. The proposition has asked for examples tonight, and it's just pointing towards Tunisia, Bahrain, Jordan. They are two examples of constitutional monarchies that now exist as a result of it. And today, we see in Colombia, on a very different stretch of the earth, 12,000 demonstrators hitting the streets, demanding something different. We see it in Venezuela. We see these campaigns built upon social media. Where are they grounded? They're grounded in the Arab Spring. How can we talk as Democrats? How can members of this House believe in democracy, believe in campaigning for democracy, and regret the very expression in the Middle East? All because of our own governments. All because of what we did in the Middle East. We created that destabilisation. And I'd like to, I know, I'm fine, thank you. I'd like to express that 20 million people can't, as Keir pointed out, be all Islamic extremists. 20 million people can't hit the streets and demand a better society. And no, I won't take anything from the proposition. Can't be painted as people that campaign for IS, campaign for these Islamic groups. They're not. They were Democrats. They were people that believed in something better, that saw the West, urged for being like the West, a Western democracy.
On that point,
and yeah, I'll take that point.
Surely Europe is guilty of this proposition of casting all the protesters being towards one aim. Maybe some of them were for Islamic State, but you can't say all of them were for democracy with the same brush.
Well, I think that 20 million demonstrators against highly authoritarian governments that didn't partake in democratic elections, as was the case in Libya, especially, I think you can say that the majority, if not the whole kind of movement of the Arab Spring, did have a tint, did have a viewpoint to raising that torch of liberty within the Middle East. But I do accept that there were a minority that didn't have a bright idea. But I'm not going to paint everyone that campaigned for the removal of the Tsarist Russian government as communists. I'm not going to blame everyone that stood on the streets of Petrograd stating that they wanted a new beginning as people that are responsible for the gulags down the line. And I think that's what the proposition are guilty of tonight. So I just say, as someone that actually father was in Libya during the Arab Spring and was held at gunpoint at one point and had to be rescued by the SAS, that there is a very real cost to this, and I accept that. I accept that there are issues within the Arab Spring, but I will never, and the opposition will never, express regret at the motives of those strong individuals, and we will never express the regret of what they did and what they stood for. And instead, we urge everyone tonight to support those individuals. Those individuals that could have been on the streets of Derry, Londonderry years ago. Those individuals that could be in the room tonight campaigning on issues across the world. We can't regret it just because someone made mistakes down the line. We have to accept it and commend them for their bravery. And that's why I commend the opposition in this debate and ask that the whole House wholeheartedly rejects the views of the proposition. Thank you.
For your speech. So, the judges are now going to leave the room and go somewhere else to decide. Matthew Bryson will be sitting there and taking names for the minutes. But for now, we are going to have a round of questions, or a couple of rounds of questions. So if anyone's got any questions for the proposition, please raise your hands. Yes, even though I've said to you before, can you state the name of the minutes?
Talking to me?
Yes, you!
You do know where I am.
I'm just messing with you, Jack.
I know.
I'm creating chaos.
Yeah, what we really want for president.
Yes.
My name's Jack Patton, in case you don't know who I am, for some weird reason. Your third speaker referenced IS as the worst example of something that's come out of the Arab Spring. Surely the response, particularly in northern Syria, of the Kurdish forces, an example of a progressive force that can make and has made very strong changes towards democracy, towards progressive movements in their territories, destroying their strongholds is an example of how the Arab Spring can long-term lead to positive change.
Yes, so make a very good point. But we are talking from the present day, looking at the past, evaluating now whether what's come up from 2010 to 2012 onwards, we're evaluating what's happened, whether it's good or bad, and so far it's not good. But you do mention a very good point, it could lead to further positive change in the region with Kurdish.
Opposition to respond.
Yeah, I completely agree with Mr. Patton. Like, there are some really good benefits, and like that kind of goes through really great, and it's definitely a good thing. And I did mention, like, we're not necessarily like at the end now, and there could be more positive change to come in the future, and we are seeing positive changes as well.
So, are there any questions for the opposition? Matthew Sullivan.
Matthew Sullivan.
Matthew Sullivan.
Matthew Sullivan. So, I think that in this debate the opposition's kind of missed the target a bit. So it's this House regrets motion. So I feel that what each side is supposed to do is weigh up all the good things that came from an event, all the bad things that came from an event, and then go like, on the balance, was that event overall like a good thing or a bad thing? And I think that the opposition have consistently gone like, yeah, all these like good results, yeah, they're fine, but if a bad result is even like slightly in the future, they're just kind of ignoring it. So I guess my question is, if you weigh up every single thing that came as a result of the Arab Spring, like not what was the motives of it, like not, you know, did the people who engaged in these revolutions have good aims, when you take the actual results, do you think that the good of the Arab Spring actually outweighs the bad?
Yeah. So I accept your point. I do view it as that. Yeah, that overall we can view this as a good thing. As we've spoken about, the Kurds fighting for autonomous state there, Tunisia, Bahrain, and Jordan, constitutional monarchies as of today. The inspiration that it's give to people across the world to use social media as a platform for revolution and for rebellion against authoritarian states. So yeah, I do accept that. And I think the opposition has accepted to an extent that there have been negative things. But I think that the negatives proposed by the proposition, including IS, were predominantly the result of US imperialistic foreign policy and not the result of the Arab Spring, which was a popular uprising.
Sorry, only one person may respond per side, so it's not a proposition as well.
Well, Mr. Sullivan, that was very receptive. I don't think that our judges are similar. I would agree with the point. I think we can't forget that Syria and Libya and Egypt are much bigger countries than Bahrain or Jordan or Tunisia, and therefore what's been an absolute catastrophe. I might have to get your bottom of court. A shit show, frankly, I would say, in the countries where of Libya, Syria, and Egypt, absolutely the negative completely outweigh the positives. It's not even a contest.
So, are there any abstaining questions as a question that we direct to either side or neither side? Mark Gilmore.
I think what we've seen here is a real split in terms of defining what exactly we're fighting for. So from the prop, we're seeing a very teleological point of view. We're focused on the facts, we're focused on the consequences of the uprising. From the up, we're seeing a very deontological, like, look at us, this is about the spirit of the uprising, this is about protecting the values of democracy. So I think to try and hash these things out, to get us on one battleground, why do the effects not matter when, why are the effects lesser when compared to the actual spirit of the uprising, to the up, and to the prop, the reverse question, why do the effects, why should we be focused on the effects when the actual spirit, the actual, meaning for the uprising was so important. Does that make sense? Yeah.
So the proposition to respond first.
So I think the plainest answer I can give to that question is it's human nature. We're just going by human nature because all the time we are looking back in hindsight at events which have happened in our past, and in many instances we express regret. We make evaluations, what happened, what was good, what was bad, weighing it up, what could be said about it as an overall judgment. And I think the plainest answer is it's just the way human nature tends to work.
Just to respond to your question, the effect, when you're talking about the effects of the Arab Spring, we were weighing up the benefits of the Arab Spring and the disadvantages of the Arab Spring, the failings of the Arab Spring. However, we also need to focus on what is the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring is a very unique and monumental event, as I said before. It's the first mass movement for democracy and for human rights in the Middle East. And the effect of that has been to spread a serious demand for human rights, for democracy, for religious tolerance throughout the Middle East. Yes, it has. We're not in this in the opposition arguing that it's been a total success. I recognize the failings. I very obviously recognize, very explicitly recognize the failings of the Arab Spring, but I'm afraid we have not seen the full effect of the very first movement to human rights and democracy.
There we go. So that was an abstaining question, wasn't it? So yeah, proposition. That was our first abstaining question. That's why I was going. You both responded, but yeah. Sorry, I just forgot how abstaining questions work. It's happened to everyone, literally everyone. So we move back around to questions for the proposition. If anyone's got any questions for the proposition, yes, I know you, but can you state your name for the minutes, please?
James Archin. The third speaker for the proposition, in the virtually the same breath, mentioned the Tunisian Inal movement and then went on to mention ISIS. The fact is, the Inal movement is led by a man who has been well read in a lot of Western philosophy and has said that he opposes the use of violence and the institution any form of Islamic theocratic dictatorship. So is this not just an instance of the same thing that you're accusing the proposition of, that you're essentially putting everyone of one opinion into the same basket, to argue that everyone who's Islamist favours an ISIS-style theocracy?
I didn't say he was linked to ISIS. I said he was the party itself as linked to the Muslim Brotherhood. So that's to correct your point. Yes, there's a massive difference in people who do want an Islamic state and people who do want an Islamist democracy, and I do acknowledge that.
As a Democrat myself, I'd respond to that point by saying that I thought what we saw from the proposition in certain elements of when they spoke about the result of democratic elections is that they weren't happy with the sort of leaders that were elected and the fact that Islamist parties were elected. Whereas a Democrat, I can say that I'd campaign against those parties, but when a result comes in 52-48, whatever it might be, I support it.
Surprise! I don't know what those numbers mean. What could those numbers possibly mean? 52 and 48, two completely arbitrary numbers. So, are there any questions for the opposition? No. Yes, John McDonald.
It's not a serious question, but I would ask the opposition, are you trying to channel Matt Smith? Sorry, no, David Tennant. Are you trying to channel David Tennant?
Well, I would just like to take this opportunity to apologise for looking like such a hipster.
It's the band and the
band and the suit, yeah.
That's what David Tennant's
I was tempted to wear pants myself, but I couldn't afford them. Are there any other questions for the opposition, just in case? We can't ask the question. Nothing solved.
Do you believe that the Middle East and the world in general would be a better place or a worse place had the Arab Spring not occurred?
I think it would be a worse place. I genuinely do. I think that just leaving these dictatorships here to stagnate because it's convenient and because it's secure for us, like, doesn't necessarily provide a better world. I think like what we've seen from the Arab Spring is success. Like we've mentioned Tunisia a lot, but like democratization and definitely like more good benefits are coming forward. And the fact that people feel more able to speak out is something that like is the most important thing. So I definitely think that the benefits outweigh the negatives.
Professor, to respond?
I think in the question you essentially summed up what this whole game certainly ought to have been about if it didn't end up necessarily being that. So I'll try and answer your question as best I can now. Unequivocally, it would be better. Quite simply, when you look at statistics for the people killed, the people displaced, the people who have lost their homes, who have lost their jobs, who have lost family members, who have lost everything in many cases, and what have they got to show for it? Theocratic Islamic dictatorships, whereas in the past they had secular dictatorships who were slightly less brutal in most cases. There really is no argument to say that anything other than a heavily weighted scale showing it would have been better if it never happened.
So, and now it's time to bring us to the abstaining questions. Remember, be careful with these. So, are there any abstaining questions, or just general things that you want them to comment on regarding the Arab Spring? Are there any of them? J. Kieran, thank you so much.
How far is it fair to judge the consequences of the Arab Spring before we allow other factors to become the deciding force? For example, take the case of Syria, started by the Arab Spring, but since then influenced by previous policy in Iraq, the Saudi-Iranian proxy conflict, and many other factors. So, how much can we attribute the Arab Spring to events in situations such as these?
Based on the length of that silence, I would have never expected that question to be so good. So it's opposition to respond first.
Well, I agree with you. I think this is the point that I try to make in regards to Syria, especially. We do have a lot of factors at play here, and the Arab Spring, what the opposition views is a simple uprising of the people, for the people. And we can say that as a result, IS has been spurred on by US involvement. We can say that then that has pulled into modern day Libya, especially around the Tripoli area, because actually what happened is we did have tribal leaders in places like Libya agreed to sit down and negotiate, and then the whole IS thing really kicked off, which we believe was spurred on predominantly by US involvement within Syria.
I would, in response to that question, mainly make 2 points. I think that in many of the examples that we have given tonight, although it can be very hard sometimes to sort of get a very clear idea of cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect, I think with the examples that we have given in Egypt and Libya about regime change and also regime toppling, which then leads to civil war because the rebels can't, govern between themselves, let's say, there is clear cause and effect which can be used. And also in that element, how long is it? Do we have to really wait before we can look back on things in hindsight? I think it's very difficult to sort of look on these things and draw an arbitrary line and say, all right, this thing just happened, we'll wait 20 years and then we'll have a summit and we'll discuss it. I think that would be quite arbitrary and it wouldn't necessarily be just in a lot of cases.
So there we go. As you may have noticed, the judges have re-entered the room, but before we go to them for their thoughts and the announcement of who has won the debate, can we please have another round of applause for all of our wonderful speakers? Things and sit back in that chair, and I will allow the judges to talk to you. Give them a round of applause.
So, anyone who has ever had the combined fortune and misfortune of attending a competitive debating competition will know what this moment is. This is the moment where the self-aggrandizing head judge stands at the top of the keeps you all waiting for as long as possible before telling you the actual result in the name of giving people feedback. I've sat through it too many times, and believe me, I'm annoyed by it. But yeah, in much the same way as I have suffered, and therefore I get to impart suffering onto you. When this motion was up for discussion for the term card, it was nearly not put on, because what we were thinking as council is, are people actually interested in debating this motion? And it was nearly taken off up until the point the suggestion of putting it as the Godkin was put in place. Because with the Godkin, you have a competitive format where people are interested in winning, and therefore are going to put that extra bit of research in to discuss the debate to a higher standard. And I think that has paid off in this context, because I think we did get a very high standard of debate within this particular competition, and I enjoyed it immensely from the sidelines. What did we see in this particular debate? I think what we saw ultimately is a argument versus consequences versus principles. Do we think that it is worth it to face the consequences of an action if it leads to, in the name of principles, if it's going to lead to negative consequences? We decide to go back and forth on that throughout the debate. Overall, we've got a high quality debate. Some feedback though for all of the speakers present. You can get individualized feedback afterwards by talking to the judges. POIs. When you're giving POIs, you need to try and keep them as brief as possible. A general bit of advice, keep them to about 1 or 2 sentences. What's even better with a POI is if you haven't spoken yet and you give someone a POI and then you can address their answer in your speech. You want to try and address people's speeches as directly as possible. With actual points themselves, examples are great. Examples are great as evidence. But when you give examples, try and develop them further into analysis. Try and tell us why that example you've given us is really important within this context. Speech is internal. Refer to speeches from your own side if you're a later speaker. Obviously you can't do that if you're a first speaker, but if you're going later down the line, refer to what your previous people have said and then back that up with new evidence. Show why your point is particularly strong in regards to this, and show why you're defeating the other side. Because one of the important things you've got to do here is find what the other side are saying and then tell us why what they've said is not as important as what you're putting forward here. Because this is a rare instance. When you get this House regrets motions, they're very dangerous, and I have gone on the record as saying I don't really like the word regrets in debating, because they tend to get into a battle back and forth about what regretting something means. But here we have an example of this House regrets motion that I feel actually ended up working and actually ended up going around the theme of regret and what exactly, how that matters in this context. So, one more point for you all in regards to rebuttal. When you are giving rebuttal in a speech, try to signpost it more clearly. If you're integrating your rebuttal, if you're giving your point as part of another point, just try to make it clear to us that it is rebuttal. So for example, say as the first proposition speaker said, or you heard the first proposition speaker tell us, blah, 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 this is why that's nonsense, etc. In this format, we are judging for 2 things. We're judging for the quality of your arguments, and we're also judging for the way you present those arguments in regards to rhetoric. From a rhetoric perspective, I think everyone did very nice. There were some very enjoying stories here tonight, including one that was completely irrelevant to the debate, but very entertaining about an SAS officer. Anyway, with that out of the way, we can get on to announcing the winning team and the winning individual. So to get it first out of the way, the winning team tonight, we believe, is the opposition. We can go more detail into that afterwards, but overall we feel that the opposition did the best job of tackling the points laid out in front of them, and they had the most points left standing at the end of the debate, because one of the metrics you do is you find out which points are left that haven't been touched by the other side, and the opposition had
the most of those, basically, so they ended up taking it. And then finally, to keep you waiting no longer, after some intense discussion, we came to eventually a unanimous decision as to the winner of the Godkin debate. 2019 is the year. Yeah. I haven't gone insane yet. The winner, in our opinion, this year is Matt. With the, I hope he uses to keep all of his SAS soldiers in check. Congratulations, Mr. Lee. Well done to all our speakers again. I'd like a big round of applause to thank our excellent judges. So, I hope you all enjoyed that debate. Well done to the speakers again. Christmas dinner sign-ups will be at the front right there. It's £24. I will be lifting my laptop from under there in case you want to get signed up. So there's 2 laptops going at the same time. I'm now going to move the PowerPoint along. Before we go, I would like to ask the speakers to get to the front very quickly for a photograph, and everyone else either get signed up or run away to the practitioner bar. Mr. Sullivan, what is this?
I don't know, this isn't a thing you can actually do, but can we pay for the Christmas dinner at the pub, or should I wait until next week?
Wait until next week.
Yes, I think it'll probably be easier to wait until next week. We will possibly be having a payment session at some point. We'll keep, it's not confirmed yet, but keep posted for that. So, thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed this meeting. Congratulations, commiserations. Hope you all had a good time. I declare this meeting adjourned.